what we've done is we have modeled different scenarios relating to any potential increase by the UK Treasury in relation to gaming and betting tax. So working on the worst case scenario, what has been modeled on a very rough basis, it's called on a linear basis, that the total loss, potential loss of corporate tax in Gibraltar on a worst case scenario, and let me say that we're not expecting that to materialize, that could have an impact on corporate tax revenues in Gibraltar in the gaming sector of £133 million.
Mr. Feetham, aren't you scaremongering because the UK's mini budget isn't on until the 26th of November? Shouldn't we just wait and see what those increases are?
Well, absolutely so. I mean, we are not saying anything different. What we are saying and what we've said publicly, and in fact you saw that I addressed members of Parliament 2 weeks ago on the Gibraltar Day in London, what we are engaging with UK Treasury on, and indeed members of Parliament, is in order to be able to address the concerns by the gaming sector in Gibraltar, or what the potential impact could be, not just to the Gibraltar gaming sector, but indeed to the UK government revenues themselves. In other words, there is a risk if you apply the Laffer curve theory that you increase tax rates and it has the opposite intended effect. In other words, instead of raising tax revenues, you actually end up with less tax revenues. I should know that, Ross, because I was asked by the Chief Minister when I took my ministerial office as Minister with responsibility for taxation to devise a national tax strategy in Gibraltar. And over the last 18 months, you would have seen when we delivered our budget that we raised significant tax revenues. We did it through targeted tax measures. Had we done the exact opposite, we would have ended up in a very similar position to other countries. All countries are facing the same budgetary demands and the same budgetary pressures.
First of all, let me just ask you, what has been the result of those conversations that you've had with the UK Treasury? Are they listening to your concerns?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. In other words, we've delivered our message loud and clear. I believe that they are listening, but of course, what they decide to do at the end of the day will be influenced by other factors, including how UK politics plays out in the United Kingdom. So we can't influence entirely the outcome. What we can do is make the arguments and articulate the arguments. Yesterday, for example, the Sunday Telegraph stated that the government was now looking, the UK government that is, was looking at raising £1 billion of tax revenues. In order to raise £1 billion of tax revenues, you would have to increase gaming tax significantly. In other words, you would have to increase it nearer to 33 or 40%, which is a significant jump to the current rate of gaming tax. Our argument is, if you do that, it will result in the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. You won't raise the tax revenues, you'll end up raising less tax revenues and undermining the very economic fabric of the sector in the United Kingdom.
Well, we heard from the chair of the tax committee of the Betting and Gaming Council, who told us that he was pretty confident that the increase won't be as drastic as everyone is fearing. But what are your thoughts? I mean, it doesn't sound as though you're as confident as he is.
Well, I am confident to the extent that the arguments are being made out correctly. The message is being delivered loud and clear. So to that extent, I do not expect the UK government to go at the higher end, of what the model is telling us. I expect a much lower rate of tax, but am I expecting an increase in tax rates? Yes, I am. Any increase in tax rates will have an impact in Gibraltar.
Let's talk about that impact. If it is the worst case scenario, £133 million.
I don't believe that would happen.
Okay, but if the tax revenue doesn't come in, what is the alternative? In the UK, they're already talking about personal tax rises. Is that what we can look ahead to here in Gibraltar?
No, I don't believe that would happen, and therefore, because that's entirely speculative, I won't be drawn into that debate. Let me tell you that when the
How do we plug the hole, though?
Well, let me tell you, we also plugged a significant hole over the last 18 months. In other words, all governments are facing the same budgetary pressures. Gibraltar is no exception. I devised for the Chief Minister a national tax strategy that delivered the highest levels of corporate and personal tax in the history of Gibraltar. And I did that by reducing the rates of personal tax, which meant that we started the tax year with £18 million less. And in so doing, we delivered an outcome that resulted in an increase in corporate tax in Gibraltar of 37% when we finished the last financial year.
Is that the 60 million extra revenue that came in?
From corporate tax, yes. And there was
that's a one-off, Mr. Feetham. So obviously we haven't got that coming in again.
Well, that is a speculative question. If you asked me how much tax revenues we have raised to date compared to last year, I would tell you that we have raised more revenue this month compared to last month, even though in the last financial year we were already heading for and achieved the highest levels of tax revenues in the history of Gibraltar. But that is not by accident.
Are you saying we're going to be exceeding last year's levels?
Let me tell you that if we take this month as a snapshot, we are significantly above. And the point I wanted to make, Ross, is that this is not by accident. We have been implementing and carefully executing a national tax strategy that has got us to where we are today. Things do not happen by accident. Money doesn't grow on trees, I can tell you. We have worked very hard over the last 2 years to be where we are today. And let me also tell you, which is one of the things that I said when I delivered my address to members of Parliament in the United Kingdom, I have had sleepless nights over the last 2 years because of this. If you get it wrong, you'll have a large percentage of the population pointing a finger when mistakes are made. We haven't made mistakes. But these things, unfortunately, are influenced by decisions that are taken by external forces. In other words, namely, an external government that is seeking, in turn, to raise their own tax revenues.
So, Mr. Feetham, just for clarity, should gaming taxes go up, which impacts the amount of tax revenue that comes in, do you rule out increasing personal taxes to plug that hole?
That is entirely speculative, and I won't be drawn into that. That is a major policy decision that can only be taken by the Cabinet. Let me say this, and I've said this in Parliament as well. If the government hadn't raised the additional £60 million of corporate tax, if we had to raise £50 million of additional revenues, not in the way that we did it through my national tax strategy, we would have been required to increase the rate of personal tax by 6%. We never did that. Remember, there are three budgetary levers. All governments have three budgetary levers. Either you raise tax revenues, which is not the same thing as raising tax rates, and I've explained what that means in Parliament. You borrow money, but that increases the national debt, or you cut public expenditure. We haven't done the last two. We focused on raising tax revenues. We are one of the few countries in the world that have actually delivered that fiscal objective.
Mr. Feetham, you are Minister for Tax, but you're also Minister for Financial Services, both of those, and gaming. So gaming, we know, contributes about 30% of GDP. So does financial services.
Correct.
You said when you became Minister that you would grow the financial services sector. Tax aside, how much has the financial services sector grown in the past 2 years?
Yes, you're absolutely right in saying that. We did say it during the election campaign, and we did say it in the manifesto. But in terms of growing those sectors in order to deliver an increase in tax revenues, it takes time. I remember, I think, going into a debate that you moderated during the election campaign, that I said that growing the financial services sector will give you an increase in employment, but it takes a number of years before you raise the equivalent of tax revenues, because of course businesses are only starting out. So therefore, growing those sectors is important, but you can't rely on those sectors in the short to medium term in terms of raising tax revenues. That is therefore not what we've done in order to deliver what we have done over the last 18 months.
Just to follow on from that, Minister, in terms of new licence applications, I know that you were asked this question and you didn't have the figure. I'm not asking you for the figure, but are you seeing more companies and businesses looking to set up shop in Gibraltar?
I am never satisfied. If you know the kind of person that I am a restless individual. I set targets in my mind which are far more ambitious than the targets that others are able to deliver. So if you asked me personally, Nigel Feetham, are you satisfied? The answer is, of course I'm not satisfied. I want more. But this is the kind of person that I am. I'm here to try to achieve what is best for the people of Gibraltar at levels that others are not able to deliver. So have they delivered targets? Yes, they have. Am I saying that those are targets that I personally will be happy with? Of course not.
Final question, Mr. Feetham. What is at the top of your agenda?
It's raising tax revenues to ensure that we can meet our budgetary expenditure. Let me give you a
Corporate
number.
tax revenues.
Yes, and revenues generally. Let me give you a number so that people are able to put into context. Government public sector salaries cost the government of Gibraltar 19 to 20 million pounds a month. That's 240 million pounds a year. Public sector pensions and public sector costs cost the government 93, roughly from the top of my head, 93 million pounds. That's a big part of the budgetary expenditure of the government. When you then include healthcare costs, which are rising and are significant, and education, that's your entire budget gone. That's your entire budget gone. So I've got to look for the additional revenues, which is what we've done without increasing the rates of personal tax. It's a huge demand on any minister for taxation.